Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
I wound up touting the Trump narrative for over a decade. That was my job. Always stay on message. Always defend.
He went on to explain that you live by the gun and by the knife, and you die by the gun and by the knife.
How many times did Mr. Trump ask you to threaten an individual or entity on his behalf?
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably.
When you were chosen for this job, did you have any choice? Is this something you had to do when you were asked to do it?
Everybody's job at the Trump Organization is to protect Mr. Trump. Every day, most of us knew we were coming in and we were going to lie for him on something. And that became the norm.
Oh, we're all tied up.
We're all
life.
together.
All together.
All together.
Right.
We think together, hang together, live together.
I did things and I acted improperly, at times at Mr. Trump's behest. I blindly followed his demands.
But did you know what they meant?
Well, I never asked what it meant, but it meant like sort of in the style of an organization, or in that style. But you don't bother. I didn't bother. I never did bother.
You never did what?
I never bothered to find out what it meant, but I have an idea what it meant.
That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code.
As the senator put it before, what did I get out of it?
What'd you get out?
Nothing but misery.
My loyalty to Mr. Trump has cost me everything. My family's happiness, friendships, my law license, my company, my livelihood, my honor, my reputation, and soon my freedom.
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
Oh, my God. That's Joe Valachi over there, everybody. Joe Valachi. Those Valachi hearings were led back in the day, okay? I think it was, like in the 60s. And that is where the Godfather, the scene with Frankie Pantangeli and all that is exactly the set. I mean, they used the Valachi hearings in Congress to create the Godfather hearings where Michael Corleone, except of course Michael Corleone doesn't testify the way Joe Valachi did because, Frankie Pantangeli, sorry, who is Michael Cohen in this? Didn't testify because Michael Corleone brought in Frankie Pantangeli's brother to sit there and to send a message in code to Frankie that if he testified, his brother would get it, right? And so what Trump did in the modern day was tweet out that Michael Cohen's father-in-law would get it if Michael Cohen testified, right? You see? So I got to say, anybody who is looking at what is going on here with Michael Cohen and what's going on here with the Trump Organization would be making a very big mistake by comparing this to Nixon. And this is what I'm hearing a lot of on the TV, that this is all about what Nixon did, only because the similarities are, the similarities are simple ones. The similarities are that Nixon broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters or hired thugs to break into the National Committee headquarters, right? And that in this case, Russia, a foreign adversary, a mafia state, seriously, a mafia state with a mafia-run oligarch in charge of it, with all of his capos giving vig back to him in order to do business anywhere on his turf, which is Russia. Okay, that is not the same as Richard Nixon hiring, a couple of thugs to break into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist office or the Democratic National Committee. So I think that the analogy there is very flawed when they say this is just like Nixon. No, this is not just like Nixon. This is like Valachi. This is like a mafia case. This is like the Godfather. This is like Frankie Pantangeli. This is like a RICO investigation. That is what this is. That's what the Valachi hearings were all about. It was about RICO, okay? It was about Cosa Nostra. It was about organized crime and how it was organized. And if you want to think of Donald Trump as something, think of him as the American Don for the Russian mafia. Okay, because that's what Donald Trump really is. He's no more, he's no less. He is the godfather of the American mafia with regard to, the territory. And Russia is letting Donald Trump control this territory of theirs. And it's so unbelievable. I mean, the Valachi hearings were about explaining to the American people that there was a mafia. Back then, people didn't believe there was a mafia. They used to say things like Senator Geary says in The Godfather, this is just an attempt to besmirch the fine Italian Americans who I consider to be the salt of the earth, right? This is all to besmirch. And in fact, we had this conversation when The Sopranos first started. Remember? Poor James Gandolfini, we miss you. But when The Sopranos first started, we still have our Edie Falco, though, gotta say. When The Sopranos first started, the same conversation. Is this an attempt to besmirch the fine name of Italian Americans who are the salt of the earth? No, it isn't. It's an attempt to show what organized crime organizations look like. That's it. And Donald Trump is, he's the American Don of the Russian mafia. You got this family of his involved in all kinds of schemes and frauds and lying and cover-ups and crimes for years-long periods of time. And Donald Trump is the person who has the clear benefit of leadership in this organized criminal organization. Now, that's what RICO is all about. RICO is about charging an organization with one charge, a RICO Act violation, which takes into account everything, the speaking in code, okay, the day-to-day crime, the rarely directing of ordering a lieutenant to do something illegal, but instead offering oblique instructions or expressing general wishes. And, that their lieutenants would simply know how to translate into action. And that is what Jerry Connolly, that is what Justin Amash, a Republican from Michigan, actually questioned Michael Cohen about.
You suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly. For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen, isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
And it's your impression that others who work for him understand the code as well?
Most people, yes.
That's what he's talking about. He's talking about RICO. He's talking about organized crime. He's talking about a corrupt organization that's covered under the Racketeering Influenced Corrupt Organizations Act. That's RICO. That's what RICO stands for. Okay? And it's a law designed to allow prosecutors to go after enterprises, organizations that engage in extended, repeated, organized fraud or criminality. Okay? There are predicate crimes that need to come under, like the prosecutors have to consider, are these predicates met? If the predicates are met, you can charge RICO, right? And they stitch together evidence of a corrupt organization, and then they go after everybody who's involved in that organization as part of an organized conspiracy to benefit its leadership. That's what the Trump organization is. That's what the Trump Foundation is. That's what the Trump charities are about. That's what, everything is about benefiting Donald Trump, no matter how they file it, no matter how they present themselves, okay? Now, the predicates include things like violent crimes, which we don't have evidence of here, like murder and kidnapping and arson and robbery. But it also includes things like fraud and obstruction of justice and money laundering and even aiding or abetting illegal immigration, like Trump does at the various golf courses. Like he actually will have his HR people drive somebody who is undocumented that he likes to a place to get fraudulent documents that are more convincing than the ones they currently have. All these stories that are out there seemed like disparate little items until you realize they're all being brought together by the Oversight Committee, by the Judiciary Committee, by the Ways and Means Committee, by the Foreign Affairs Committee. All of these things are being brought together in one big, giant package of RICO. That is why there were 81 requests from 81 separate people and entities put out there by Gerald Nadler at Judiciary. That is why. And I hope everyone understands that the reason why these specific organizations and entities were selected is because there can be no claim of executive privilege with them, because they've either cooperated with Robert Mueller, a la Don McGahn. Don McGahn is a senior White House official. But the only person that can claim executive privilege is the executive, is the president himself. And when Mueller wanted to talk to Don McGahn, the president didn't exert executive privilege. He didn't assert, that's the right word. He didn't assert executive privilege. So Don McGahn was able to talk to Mueller. And so there can now be no claim of executive privilege that Donald Trump can assert because he previously allowed Don McGahn to talk to Mueller. See, these 81 were picked for very specific reasons. And one of those major, major reasons is that the documents that are being asked for are all documents that have previously been produced. They'd been previously produced by the people on the list, either to congressional committees, to Robert Mueller, to SDNY, to a Virginia court, to a Manhattan court. See what I mean? And that is why this 81 is so, it's moving so fast. They're getting compliance, and they're getting compliance pretty quickly because these are documents that are already packaged together for discovery purposes, for turning over to various entities.
So this is a big list. 81 people is a lot. Have you had any response already? I realize this is the first day.
Yes, we have. We've been having some very positive responses from a number of the 81 people today.
In what sense?
Well, they've been saying they will give us documents, and some have already started giving us documents.
Do you anticipate that these letters and these requests that you sent out today will be the first step towards subpoenas to some of these people and entities if they don't cooperate?
Well, if they don't cooperate, yes, but we don't know that they won't cooperate. In the initial batch of requests we sent out to these 81 people, we limited the requests to material that they had already submitted to other agencies, to the special prosecutor, the Southern District, so that there could be so that they could respond quickly and there could be no question of privilege. We will follow up with some of them, maybe many of them, with other document requests that for documents they haven't already submitted to others. But to get speedy compliance, to start the work very quickly, The initial document request was for documents that they had already turned over to other people.
You see, there is a method to the Judiciary Committee. There's an actual thought process. This is not Benghazi, okay? This is a serious look at a fraudulent organization headed by the President of the United States. This is a serious RICO enterprise. This is an effort to identify not just the obstruction of justice, not just the abuse of his power in office, but this is about insurance fraud. This is about suborning perjury, asking Michael Cohen to lie. And on the other side, I'll play you a back and forth between Representative Jerry Connolly, where he asks Michael Cohen about the Trump lawyers, the Jay Sekulows, and the group coming to him, and did they ask him to lie for the president? Did they ask him to cover stuff up? Now, that's witness tampering. That's also called suborning perjury. That's also covered under RICO, along with the tax fraud, the bank fraud, the charity fraud, and AOC when she questioned about insurance fraud. This would all fall under the racketeer-influenced corrupt organization law. That's what Congress is doing. And this is what it looks like.
At RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
This meeting occurred just before your testimony before the Select Committee on Intelligence here in the House. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Was that a topic of conversation with the president himself?
If this is the specific instance that I was there with Mr. Sekulow, yes.
So you had a conversation with the President of the United States about your impending testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What was the nature of that conversation?
He wanted me to cooperate. He also wanted just to ensure, by making the statement, and I said it in my testimony, there is no Russia, there is no collusion, there is no deal. He goes, it's all a witch hunt, and he goes, this stuff has to end.
Did you take those comments to be suggestive of what might flavor your testimony?
Sir, he's been saying that to me for many, many months. And at the end of the day, I knew exactly what he wanted me to say.
And why was Mr. Sekulow in the meeting?
Yeah.
Because he was going to be representing Mr. Trump going forward as one of his personal attorneys in this matter.
So it was sort of a handoff meeting.
Correct.
In any way, final question, did the president in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee?
Again, it's a difficult answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. What he does is, again, Michael, there's no rush. There's no collusion. There's no involvement. There's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point, that's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting, yes, that's the message.
See, this is what I'm talking about. So what you have here is the president suborning perjury from Michael Cohen with regard to Michael Cohen's testimony to the House Intelligence Committee. And Jerry Connolly understood this, and that is why he asked, did he tell you to lie? And he said, he doesn't ask you. He talks in code, okay? He just keeps saying to you, there is no Russia deal. There is no collusion. It's all a witch hunt. And Michael Cohen knows that that's what he's supposed to say, okay? What he does, there's no Russia, there's no collusion, there's no involvement, there's no interference. And Jerry Connolly says, did the president in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to the questions? Or the content of your testimony before a House committee? He says, again, it's difficult to answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. Michael, there's no Russia. There's no collusion. There's no involvement. There's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point. That's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting. Yes, that is the message he wanted me to reinforce. And then when Justin Amash from Michigan, a Republican, said he doesn't give you orders, he speaks in code. And he says, yes, and I understand the code.
You've suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly. For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen, isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
And it's your impression that others who work for him understand the code as well?
Most people, yes.
Now, that is exactly what Joe Valachi testified to. And they said, did you ask him what he meant by that? You know, he's talking about the oath of omerta, Joe Valachi was. And he's saying the Godfather pricks your finger and then you put the blood and you go, did you ever ask him what this means? He goes, I didn't bother. He knew, he didn't bother. He knew what it meant. Everybody understood what it meant, okay? And just so we can remember that Cohn pled guilty to making false statements to Congress on the Moscow Tower deal. In the sentencing memo, Mueller writes that when he submitted to the federal court, his lies submitted to the federal court, his conduct involving false statements to Congress on the Moscow Tower deal, quote, was intended to benefit client one, that's Trump, in accordance with client one's directives. This goes to the Comey testimony, too, that we played yesterday for you. And, we could pull it up, too. But Comey testified to the same kind of code. Comey testified that when he went to the White House and he was asked, can you see your way clear to let Flynn go? Senator Risch from Idaho tried to say, well, how many people ever get prosecuted because they say they hope for for some result? No. Risch, you missed the entire RICO thing that Mueller is looking at. You missed the entire meaning behind this code. And Comey said it wasn't exactly in those words, but I took it as a directive that is what he wanted me to do. And that's also an indication that this is a RICO investigation. Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, this Russia thing, Russia, and now they're changing it all. Now they're changing it all to be obstruction of justice and suborning perjury and tax fraud and insurance fraud and charity fraud and witness tampering. They're not changing anything. Two things can be true at the same time. That Trump was taking help from the government of Vladimir Putin, that Michael Cohen doesn't have direct evidence, and he's an attorney, but he has circumstantial evidence, which is usually more powerful than eyewitness testimony, should tell you that two things could be true at the same time. That Donald Trump was willing to and did get help from the Russian government, did get help from other people around him who would coordinate with the dump, with WikiLeaks, with Guccifer, with the dump. I mean, Roger Stone, just so you know, Roger Stone pled guilty. Roger Stone is charged with, he didn't plead guilty, Roger Stone is charged with lying about his interactions with Russian intelligence operative Guccifer and lying about his contacts with WikiLeaks. That is why Roger Stone had his house raided. because they have evidence that a court accepted to indicate enough that with probable cause that Roger Stone was in touch with WikiLeaks and lied about it, that he was in touch with Guccifer and he lied about it. This is all part of the same exact case. Now, I'll tell you, Congress has a lower burden of proof in some respects than Mueller does, but a higher burden of proof in other respects. What does that mean? It means Congress can find that somebody did that a president, let's be specific, that a president did something that that isn't criminal because he had a lot of buffers, Senator. He never gave a direct order. He had a lot of buffers. So if he told you to push a button, yeah, I knew what he meant, and did you ever have a direct conversation with him where he said to you to push a button? No, he had a lot of people, in between. Oh, so the president had buffers. What? President had buffers. What's the buff? Oh, yeah, he had a lot of buffers, Senator. Okay? So you could have evidence of all kinds of fraud. You could have evidence of, all kinds of things that might not be criminal, but are impeachable. For instance, violation of the emoluments clause, using the presidency to enrich yourself. That might not be criminal, but it is impeachable. So you have two different, but the burden of proof on Congress is higher in this way. They have to convince us that impeachment is warranted, something they failed to do when it came to Bill Clinton parsing his words about having an affair. Now, that was impeachable. Why? Because they believed that Bill Clinton lied about conversations he had had with Monica Lewinsky, where apparently Monica Lewinsky got the message from the president, Clinton, that they were to keep this affair secret and that she should never admit it. And that was what she was doing until Linda Tripp and Lucianne Goldberg came up with a scheme to get her to tape record her conversations. Well, she didn't do it. They did it. They tape recorded her conversations and then used that as evidence to show that Bill Clinton asked Monica Lewinsky to lie about their affair. That became known as suborning perjury. And while that wasn't going to be a criminal charge against Bill Clinton in a court of law, it was an impeachable offense as far as the Republicans were concerned. However, the American people weren't buying it. We didn't think that that was impeachable. And impeachment is a political effort. And they did not have, the Republicans did not have on their side, clean hands, because Newt Gingrich was on his third wife at the time, and was, he was on his second wife, having an affair with the third wife, the to-be third wife. We had Livingston, who was also, fooling around. You had a lot of different. So we didn't believe they had clean hands. And number two, we didn't believe that an affair was an impeachable offense, whether the two of them, who Monica was in love, decided to cover up, which is normal behavior for an affair. That's why it's called an affair and not an open relationship. And so Bill Clinton's approval ratings went through the roof during the impeachment. Bill Clinton's approval ratings during the impeachment went up to 68%. 68% of the American people supported Bill Clinton and were furious with the Republicans who were trying to ruin his presidency because Bill Clinton, seriously, was the only person to balance the budget. He was the only one talking about health care at all. That was Hillary, right? He was the only person that understood boom and bust. And he was the only one where wages were growing and people felt, that the economy was working for them. We were seeing a lot of new inventions. We were seeing a lot of innovation. We were seeing the internet come to fruition. Phones were getting smaller. They were things that were taking up entire rooms were now in your pocket. And people liked it. And so to go after Bill Clinton on something so stupid backfired. So what's going on here? And this is why yesterday I told you two things. Donald Trump will die in prison because of this RICO investigation that is now started. And the only reason why it took so long to get started is because idiot boy shut down the government for 35 days. And so no one could do anything. Now they're back, and they are beginning this investigation, which will be laid out before you and me, which will show you that this president has been destroying records in the White House about conversations he had with Vladimir Putin, about the interpreter telling her never to tell anybody whatever he said to Vladimir Putin. I could tell you the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, they just wrote a letter to Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, and they are requesting all kinds of documents that are protected under the Presidential Records Act, meaning the president has a duty to preserve all presidential records, and that would include the president is literally affirmatively prohibited from disposing of records, okay? That's the Presidential Records Act, because the president's conversations with foreign leaders belong to the American people, believe it or not. We live in a democracy, and Trump is required to preserve those records. And it seems like he has told interpreters to throw away their notes. There's a story that Politico broke a while ago that said that there's a guy who tapes Trump's papers back together after he rips them up. That was June 10th, 2018 at Politico.com. It's called Trump Papers Filing System. There's another one that, an article about how he had asked the interpreter not to discuss what happened in the Hamburg meeting, private meeting with Putin, and we know Dan Coates told Andrea Mitchell he has no earthly idea, none whatsoever, what President Trump talked to Vladimir Putin with in Helsinki, and that we have a right to know.
In Helsinki, the president was alone with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours, more than 2 hours, with only translators. Mm-hmm. Basically, how do you know what happened? You were on the dark side of the moon. How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. I think as time goes by, and the president has already mentioned some things that happened in that meeting, I think we will learn more. But that is the president's prerogative.
No, it isn't.
If you had asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way. But that's not my role. That's not my job. So
it is too.
It is what it is.
No, it isn't what it is. And this is the problem with Dan Coates. Okay, this is the Republican streak in Dan Coates. Dan Coates knows, because we know, because the Washington Post reported that Donald Trump, the president of the United States, confiscated the notes of his interpreter, took those notes from the meeting in Hamburg and also in Helsinki, and that the interpreter was seen leaving the Helsinki meeting with Putin with pages of notes. That, my friends, are presidential records. And the president has a sworn duty to keep those records, to not dispose of those records. Records means log files, metadata, conversations.
To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
I wonder if you remember this exchange with the Attorney General now of the United States of America, Bill Barr, under questioning from Kamala Harris.
So you were the Attorney General, obviously, under President George H.W. Bush, and in the Reagan White House, a senior policy advisor. So I'm going to assume that you are familiar with the Presidential Records Act. And my question is, in the context of a Washington Post report that the president took possession of an interpreter's notes documenting the president's meeting with the Russian President Putin in 2017. And the question then is, does that violate the Presidential Records Act?
Your initial assumption, I'm afraid, was wrong. I'm not familiar with that act.
You're not familiar
at some time I was, but I really don't know what it says.
You don't know what it says?
No.
Okay.
At some point,
I was. To keep to keep documents and not destroy them, essentially.
At one point, I knew what it said, but I'm not familiar with it right now.
You see, this is all coming full circle. I mean, there are times when you watch these hearings and you go, it was shocking that he said he didn't know what the Presidential Records Act is, and he's been in the White House 2 times before under 2 different presidents, and that shocked her. But did you hear the question? She's asking about the destruction of the interpreter's notes. The interpreter's notes, the notes that were taken during private meetings with Vladimir Putin. Now, there is no way that the president would go to jail for destroying presidential notes or telling an interpreter to destroy her note. But that is an impeachable offense under our Constitution. So these 2 things can be the same. And there are people out there that are supposedly on the side of all things progressive who are in complete and utter denial about the fact that the president of the United States is the American Don of the Russian Mafia. And this matters to the governance of the United States. This matters about whether or not America is America anymore. This matters about whether or not a president can get away with things that aren't specifically criminal, but are impeachable, are removable, are an abuse of power, are a conspiracy to defraud the American people. And so I have to tell you, I look at some of these, Twitter accounts, and I just say, you're an idiot. You are, because that person is supposed to understand, because they have a microphone too, what is going on, and that person is supposed to understand that this president is putting an agenda forward that has nothing to do with keeping us safe and secure from all enemies, foreign and domestic. This person is supposed. I mean, I swear to God, I cannot believe what passes for media, let alone progressive media. I'm shocked by it all the time, because there are no rules of the road. So here's the letter that was written to the acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. And this was written by 2 committees because they both have jurisdiction over these 2 topics. The topic is whether or not the president is protecting a Russian agenda over an American agenda, a Russian foreign policy over an American foreign policy, and oversight of the president's destruction of presidential records. So you have the Intelligence Committee and you have the Oversight Committee joining together to pen this letter. Okay, so this would be Adam Schiff and Elijah Cummings. Dear Mr. Mulvaney, the committees are writing to request information regarding reports that President Donald Trump may have violated the Presidential Records Act by destroying documents in order to keep secret the details of meetings with Russian Federation President Vladimir Putin. Congress enacted the Presidential Records Act in the wake of Watergate and President Nixon's attempt to destroy White House tapes. The legislation was intended to ensure that all presidential records, quote, are properly preserved and made readily available to the American public. The Presidential Records Act makes clear that presidential records belong to the American people and that President Trump is required to preserve those records. And then they quote the Presidential Records Act. And it says the president shall take all steps as may be necessary to assure that the activities, deliberations, decisions, and policies that reflect the performance of the president's constitutional, statutory, or other official or ceremonial duties are adequately documented, and that such records are preserved and maintained as presidential records pursuant to the requirements of this section and other provisions of law. And then they spell it out in plain English in case Donald Trump should be reading this. President Trump is prohibited from disposing of records unless, quote, they no longer have administrative, historical, informational, or evidentiary value. And if he's going to destroy them, right, goes on to say he must first obtain the written views of the archivist of the United States before disposing of these records. There are checks and balances built into every single thing we do as a government. Then they lay out the case. On January 13, 2019, this is what Kamala was asking about, Kamala. The Washington Post reported that President Trump confiscated the notes of his interpreter following a July 7, 2017 meeting with President Putin in Hamburg, Germany, and instructed his interpreter not to discuss what happened in the meeting. U.S. officials also reportedly were never able to obtain reliable information about the president's 2-hour meeting with President Putin in Helsinki, Finland on July 16, 2018, although the U.S. interpreter was seen leaving the meeting with pages of notes. Previous reports have also raised concerns that President Trump may be violating the Presidential Records Act by physically tearing up presidential records. Another report raised concerns that President Trump may be failing to document hundreds of calls and meetings that do not appear on his schedule. A press report documenting 3 months of President Trump's schedules. And you may not understand why this executive time thing, which is just, early in the morning to late, and that people just say, oh, all he's doing is watching TV. Oh, hell no. These reports mean something. A press report documenting 3 months of President Trump's schedules indicated that he spends approximately 60% of his time in unspecified executive time. In response, Madeleine Westerhout, the director of Oval Office operations, seemingly confirmed in a tweet that the president was having numerous calls and meetings that do not appear on his schedule. She wrote, quote, "What these don't show are the hundreds of calls and meetings at real Donald Trump takes every day." Whoops. Whoops. Where are the logs for these phone calls? For these reasons, we now request that you preserve all documents, communications, and other data, records that may be required for the committee's oversight and investigative duties relating to this subject. The term records is broad. It includes log files of phone calls, metadata. Preserve means taking reasonable steps to prevent the partial or full destruction, alteration, testing, deletion, shredding, incineration, wiping, relocation, migration, theft, or mutation of electronic records, including emails, as well as negligent or intentional handling, which would foreseeably make such records incomplete or inaccessible. Specifically, you should exercise reasonable efforts to identify and notify former employees and contractors, subcontractors, and consultants who may have access to such records, that these must be preserved. And exercise reasonable efforts to identify, recover, and preserve any records which have been deleted or marked for deletion but are still recoverable. And if it is the routine practice of any employee or contractor to destroy or otherwise alter records, stop it. It says either halt such practices or arrange for the preservation of complete and accurate duplicates or copies of such records suitable for production if requested. And then they ask 5 questions. And the questions are simple. Did he take possession of the interpreter's notes from the Hamburg meeting? Did he destroy them? Did he preserve them? Who has them? Who's in control of them? Have the interpreter's notes or a copy been provided to the State Department? Then they asked, does any official within the Trump administration, including within the White House, have any record of any meeting or call between Trump and Putin? If so, provide the date of the meeting or the call, the location of the meeting or the call, the identity of all officials who have possession, custody, or control of those records, and an explanation of how those records have been and are continuing to be preserved. Then they ask which officials within the Trump administration, including within the White House, were provided summaries or readouts of Trump's meetings or calls with Vladimir Putin, including Hamburg and Helsinki. We know Dan Coates, who is the director of national intelligence, says he has no idea what happened there. He has no clue. Did the United States government pay the interpreters who staffed the meetings or the calls between Trump and Putin, including Hamburg and Helsinki? And number 5, how has the president documented and preserved records relating to the hundreds of calls and meetings that Marilyn Westerhut claimed don't appear on his schedule? You see, there are crimes here that aren't exactly suitable for the SDNY federal prosecutors. There are crimes here that aren't suitable to charge the president of the United States with in a court of law, especially considering the fact that the widely held view by the Office of Legal Counsel is you cannot indict a president. So these then become impeachable offenses with the remedy for violating these rules of the road, these regulations, these presidential requirements. Removal is the remedy. Removal of such a derelict president, of such a president who refuses to maintain documents for the benefit of the American public, for the benefit of the State Department, for the benefit of the Foreign Relations Committee, for the benefit of the Oversight Committee, for the benefit of the Intelligence Committee, and for the intelligence community to leave Dan Coates wondering what the hell he told Putin, promised Putin, gave Putin, assured Putin of. What in the world is going on? You see, we cannot conduct ourselves as a sovereign. We cannot conduct ourselves as a nation of free people if we don't know what the president has promised in exchange for the help he got from a foreign adversary. Oh, yes, idiot progressives out there with microphones. Two things can be true at the same time. And it ain't just, oh, you won't talk about this because of that. No, our country is under siege, and it matters who the president is. The Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence is consistent with its jurisdiction, consistent with its investigative responsibilities. They are conducting an investigation into efforts by Russia and our other foreign entities to influence our political processes during and since the 2016 U.S. election, which Dan Coates has sworn under oath is continuing. So shut up or go do stand-up comedy. I promise I will never do stand-up comedy ever again. You promise you'll never do this again.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
Radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me. Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
According to press reports, Donald Trump met privately with Vladimir Putin, and no one in the U.S. government has the full story about what was discussed. Director Haspel and Director Coates, would this put you in a disadvantaged position in terms of understanding Russia's efforts to advance its agenda against the United States? Question for you two. And then I'm out of time. Thank you for letting me have them respond, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Senator, clearly this is a sensitive issue, and it's an issue that we ought to talk about this afternoon. I look forward to discussing that in a closed session.
In a closed session, he wouldn't answer the question because the truth is that the president is jeopardizing in a very profound way our national security, our foreign policy, our counterintelligence concerns, especially since you have testimony from the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, there, saying he has no idea what the president talks privately to Putin about, and also saying that Russia is still here and they are still involved and that they are still engaging in what he calls active measures to improperly influence American elections. And that if these things are true, it is undermining the proper functioning of our American government and the department's access to critical information germane to diplomatic missions and its ability to develop and execute foreign policy that advances America's national interest. These are real and serious concerns. And that is what the House was supposed to be doing when Nunes was in charge of the Intelligence Committee, because the intelligence community said that not only was Russia engaged in active measures, but that the president understood it, and it was continuing. Testimony that we've gotten from various people who have been at the FBI during this period of time have said that the president was never surprised to hear it, that the president never asked one question about, well, how do we stop it? Instead, he lashed out at those intelligence community personnel. Instead, he lashed out at law enforcement personnel and fired them and besmirched them and smeared them. And by them, I mean Comey and McCabe, who have all testified that the president was never surprised to learn it and that he never asked how to stop it. We're in big trouble. And now you've got these crazy Republicans like Sean Hannity and that propaganda channel, and that's all that is. That is just bullcrap, man. That is absolute, it's Fox. FOX is one vowel movement away from what it does to the news, and they do it because they are all together in an effort to suppress everything, to keep the American people from knowing anything about the direction this country has taken, because they feel like they'll be taken care of in the end. And it's going to be really sad because Sean Hannity earned himself a little subpoena by saying that Michael Cohen had told him over and over and over again that he was never aware of, that Donald Trump was never aware of the hush money payments. Sean Hannity said that on his TV show when he was talking to Donald Trump, and he's going to get subpoenaed now because apparently he's got some inside information that he's sharing with the TV audience but won't swear to under oath, and he's going to have to. He's going to have to. I mean, they don't care about America. They care about themselves, and it's very sick, and it's very twisted, and it's very wrong, and it's dangerous on top of all of that. Dangerous, I tell you. Where did you put Sean Hannity? 10? Let's see. Here, listen.
Admit they're wrong. They were just going to pivot into investigating anything they make up and everything involving the president. And we, the people, will now be subject to what it will be the biggest, most gruesome display of modern-day McCarthyism, which is just the widest fishing net expedition, all in an effort to destroy the president and anybody who supports him, because the bottom line is all they care about is getting their power back so they can institute socialism right here in this country.
I mean, the irony is obviously lost on him that McCarthyism was about hunting socialist people who they believed were, one little click away from becoming, red commies. And that's what McCarthyism is. Now he's accusing socialists of what? Hunting themselves? It makes no sense. But this is the kind of crap that goes out in prime time on a station that is allowed under our law to brand itself as news. We need standards and practices. We used to have it. You remember we used to have standards and practices in television where not only couldn't you curse, but you couldn't say the word pregnant. When Lucy was pregnant, with little Ricky, she couldn't say the word pregnant, okay? She couldn't. They had to sleep in separate beds. Right? Because they had standards and practices. As goofy as those standards were, as goofy as those practices were, to never refer to being with child as being pregnant, as goofy and as wrong as those were, at least there were some standards and practices. News was not intended to make a profit. It was supposed to be a public service. And so in order to brand yourself news, you had to be held to a higher standard. Couldn't just say any schmeary thing you wanted, which is what they do over there. And we are suffering as a country. We're suffering from unbelievable amounts from propaganda. And does it come from both sides? No, it comes from the fringiest of the fringe. You got a core in the middle. It's called democracy. And then you got things that are leeches on democracy. And then you've got the what do you call it? The symbiotic relationship between the leeches and the bacteria, okay? And then you got the fringiest of the fringe. And they are the stupidest people on this planet. I mean, just idiots. Really cannot put a story together, cannot manage facts, cannot handle a large conspiracy, cannot handle an attack on this country from within. They just can't do it. And if they see it, which I doubt, because I told you, I've known them. I'm, Russia's smart, but he doesn't give a rat's ass about you. His whole thing was always about self-aggrandizement and making him, and the deals he made to the exclusion of every other voice, where you could be in a market, you could be in a city, you could be in a rural town, and you might have 2 or 3 talk stations, and Rush was on all of them. That's a conspiracy to defraud the American people, okay? And it was never prosecuted. Instead, ahead of the prosecution, ahead of the antitrust regulations that should have kicked in, President Bill Clinton signed a piece of legislation allowing that to occur, allowing that to happen. It was called the Telecommunications Deregulation Bill, and it wiped out independent media, literally wiped it out. It all became corporate, and this is what it sounds like. This is what it looks like. Now, the other one, this Hannity, he's dumb as a rock. I swear to God, he wouldn't be able to process a fact pattern if you showed it to him in diagrams. Or it's like Trump. Trump is an idiot too. Trump thinks he's a brilliant student, but he threatened his schools, everyone he ever attended, that if they released any information about his grades or how he got in or anything, he would sue them. But he's so brilliant. You would think he would want his excellent grades to be put out for everybody to consume and to say, wow, he's a big brain. You would think he would want his taxes released to show you that, wow, he really is a self-made billionaire. Wow, he really did do it by following the rules of capitalism. It's a system that can work. Bull crap, man. This is just idiots covering for idiots, morons with their fingers in the pie. I mean, yesterday, Jane Mayer wrote this article. We didn't get to talk about it yesterday, and we probably won't get to really dissect it today, except to tell you that it's 30 pages long, and Jane Mayer is one of the greatest journalists we've ever had, okay? She was out in front of the torture story. She's been out in front on a lot of stories that are very difficult to report, and she always gets it right. And if you... I've been in court having to defend myself about being newsworthy, about being a truth teller. And if you say to the court, which I have, that I relied on Jane Mayer's work, they go, oh, okay. That's you're allowed to do that because she meets every journalistic standard that you could lay in front of her. So she comes up with a story yesterday, and what is she talking about? She's talking about the unholy alliance between Donald Trump and Fox News that goes all the way up to Rupert Murdoch, which is sick. And that he does talk to, these hosts every single freaking day, and they all get one with the message, just like Michael Cohen. Okay, the messaging is consistent. He speaks in code. They know what he wants. They do it. It's really sick. It's mafioso TV at this point. So there's that. And then there's another part of the article that talks about something I was very concerned about with Bill Barr being the Attorney General, because Bill Barr was a lobbyist for the Time Warner CNN, right? The Time Warner CNN merger. And Donald Trump wanted to punish CNN. And he didn't want that merger to go through. And Bill Barr did. And I said he might be the best lobbyist you've ever seen in your life, because once Bill Barr becomes the Attorney General of the United States, he's going to be in charge of the Antitrust Division. Well, the court has just approved that merger, number one. But also what they found was that Donald Trump uses the Department of Justice as if they were his personal attorneys. And he asked them to file a lawsuit, a frivolous one, saying that the merger should not go through. And the Department of Justice actually accommodated him. And they filed a lawsuit so frivolous that it was laughed out of court. And then they appealed it, and the appeals court laughed even harder. And now the merger has been approved. And Bill Barr is our Attorney General. Coincidence? This is corruption. This is abuse of power. This is using the Justice Department to settle scores and vendettas, and then smearing the honest agents, the Bob Muellers, the heroes, the James Comeys, smearing them, smearing the McCabe's, smearing their reputations, saying that they are a deep state out to get the American Don and the Russian Mafia. Damn straight. Because, quite frankly, you are manipulating or withholding every piece of information in contravention of federal laws that expressly require you to tell agencies and the American people, what are you basing our policies on?
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
Well, I think, you hear the president say, no collusion, no collusion, no collusion, right? He's always talking about the focus on the relationship between his campaign and Russia, which is the scope of that investigation is under the House Intelligence Committee as well as several other investigatory bodies. So while he's talking collusion, 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 I think in oversight, we should be talking about taxes, 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 and his bank account, his bank account, his bank account, his financial statements, because that's where I think actually some of the most troubling practices are with direct relevance to the American people under the scope of oversight.
Yes, exactly right. And that is why all these committees with various duties to do oversight on the executive branch, that is what Congress does. They don't give up the power of the purse. That's theirs. They don't give up oversight. They don't give up their role as a check on presidential power simply because the president wishes they would and tweets that he wants them to. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And so you have a Trump Tower meeting. You have Jared and Eric Prince trying to set up back channels to Russia. You have Manafort and Flynn texting and creating an environment that would take sanctions off of Russia in exchange for paydays. You have Stone and Corsi lying about Seth Rich. He's the one that leaked all these documents. He's the one, right? And Corsi just retracted that story because he's being sued, finally. And they're winning in court that he defamed this dead boy, Seth Rich. But you also have, Stone being charged with lying to the government about his contacts with WikiLeaks, lying to the government about his contacts with a Russian intelligence operative named Guccifer 2.0. You have the president firing James Comey. You have the president asking people like Don McGahn and John Kelly to fire Robert Mueller. There is enough conspiracy activity here for Mueller to write something that is going to be devastating. And I know a lot of this, Mueller's report is going to fall with it's not going to be real. How do you know? How do you know this? There is no information that you have that I don't have. There is none. And I got news for you. If Mueller's report doesn't, show some sort of a conspiracy between Trump associates and the campaign and the transition team and the national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and the campaign manager, Paul Manafort, and the deputy campaign manager, Rick Gates, and Donald Trump himself, and Jr., and his Trump Tower meeting with Ike Cavallazzi and Natalia Veselnitskaya, and Rob Goldstone's emails that the Russian government is supporting and Cambridge Analytica. If that doesn't happen, then no one is ever going to believe in a special counsel ever again. No one is ever going to believe in investigating a president ever again. And the communist bastards, the oligarchs, will have won. And that's why I cannot possibly believe what some of these lunatics on the left are saying. Congress is looking at violations of constitutional protections, like the emoluments clause, like tax evasion, like security clearances, like, is the president the head of a criminal organization? Is the president the head of a criminal foundation? Was the transition team compromised? How much did Mike Pence know? Should he be our vice president? What is the inaugural committee? Where is the money? Where did it go? $107 million. Did he witness tamper? Was he floating pardons? That's what Congress is going to look at. And you know what? At the same time, because we're progressives, and because there are 95 to 100 members of the Progressive Caucus, thank God, we managed to pass 2 pieces of legislation on gun safety, one demanding universal background checks on everything, including private sales, except for sales between close relatives. A second gun rights law, gun safety law that gives the FBI more time to do a background check, because previously, if you were coming up funky, if it was coming up weird, and the FBI was taking more than 3 days because you had a weird thing on your record, then they went ahead and sold you the gun. Not anymore. Now it's a 10-day background check if you should come up strange or funky, or somebody with a domestic abuse on your record, or somebody with drug abuse on your record, or somebody who kicked their dog, violence against animals on your, instead of just saying, well, it's a weird record and we only have 3 days, they have 10 days now. So it seems like they can legislate and do oversight at the same time. We also have Representative Sewell introducing a new Voting Rights Act to reinstate the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which Antonin Scalia said we don't need anymore, which was absurd. We also have H.R. 1 that's going to be voted on in the House that takes money out of politics. And we also are writing a Green New Deal for infrastructure development with an eye toward the next wars are going to be over water here. I mean, here's a little report that went unnoticed. The coal ash coming from these coal-fired power plants are contaminating all the waterways in 39 states, and people are getting cancer.
It's quiet, it's safe, it's a family atmosphere.
Danielle Bailey Lash grew up in Walnut Cove, North Carolina. The tranquil town of just over 1,000 people sits right along picturesque Ballew's Lake.
The lake, that was a big reason to move into this area?
Dream location, it had everything that we needed, and the price was right.
The price was right because just over those trees is the Ballew's Creek Steam Station, one of Duke Energy's largest coal-burning power plants. And one of the realities of coal-burning plants is that you need a place to dispose of the waste. And that traditionally has meant coal ash ponds, like this. It may look like a beautiful lake, but it is basically an unlined pit in the ground with millions of tons of ash. Mercury, cadmium, arsenic, contaminants associated with cancer, right in Danielle's backyard. In 2009, Danielle began experiencing headaches.
And I went to the hospital, and they told me that I had a brain tumor. And they weren't lying. They said it was the size of a drink box, right over here.
Can I take a look again?
Sure.
She was diagnosed with stage 3 astrocytoma, brain cancer.
What do you think caused all this?
I'm 100% sure I know what caused it. And that's Duke Energy.
Great. So here's a Republican explaining on faux news why he's against writing a Green New Deal.
Gary, our farmer friend, I see you shaking your head. What are you thinking about, Gary?
Yeah, Gary.
Many environmentalists, and OAC being one of them, do not realize that America is covered in grass. And 75% of a cow or a beef animal's body weight is made up of grass, which we cannot eat. So we would be eliminating a livelihood of a huge portion of America, or United States anyway, in their production of beef.
All right. Thank you all for your comments and for being here today.
What? 75% of a cow is made up of grass, everybody. And that is why he's against a Green New Deal. What? Sebastian Gorka, they're going to take away your hamburgers. I mean, these are communists. They truly are. I mean, it's amazing. They say the stupidest things. Oh, thank you so much for your really? The Green New Deal has not been written yet. It is being crafted And we can contribute to it by telling stories of cancer clusters around coal ash infested lakes with mercury. There is no safe level of mercury. None. Zero. But somehow our Congress is able to chew gum and walk at the same time. Somehow we are managing to pass 2 pieces of gun safety legislation, something that has not happened since 1994, when we had an assault weapons ban for 20 years. And then it expired, you see. No, we had it for 10 years. And then it expired in 2004. And we haven't talked about it since. And now we see, kids coming home dead from school. We managed to introduce a Voting Rights Act. We managed to have H.R. 1, which is an anti-corruption bill, which actually addresses the issue of money in politics. And we are managing to write a Green New Deal. We are managing to talk about health care. We are managing to have a debate about Medicare for all, or a single-payer system, or Medicare starts at 50, all different ways to deal with the fact that 30 million Americans have no health care, and even more millions are underinsured, and even more millions can't afford their copays, can't afford their deductibles, and can't afford their premiums. Hello. And the only thing Trump was able, the Chinese trade war is over. Feel any better? Nothing happened. Nothing happened. He rewrote NAFTA, everybody. Yeah, the name of it. Feel better? Is that good? Where's Infrastructure Week? When is that going to happen? Where's Mexico's money to pay for the stupid, stupid wall? Where's the tax cut for the middle class that he said, we're going to put it in. We're putting it in the next few days. I'm not playing it because I'm just so sick of him. But where are all these things? Where are all these things he promised? And they only hone in. He promised the wall. Nobody promised Mexico would pay for the freaking wall. And to quote Trey Crowder, that would be like Grandpa promising a PlayStation for Junior on Christmas Day, and instead on Christmas Day, Junior wakes up and you give him a receipt for absolutely nothing and smack him in the face. Merry Christmas. Somehow we managed to govern. Somehow Democrats know how to balance a budget. Do we screw up? Bill Clinton screwed up the entire media market with this Telecommunications Deregulation Act. Oh, yes, he did. But they managed to legislate. They managed to do stuff. And all Republicans did, tax cut for the wealthy. Biggest transfer of wealth in the history of the United States. Well, shouldn't say that. One of the. Robin Mesa.
Hi, Randy.
Hey,
I was just thinking about, it's funny that you bring up like truth in news and information, and I actually pitched this to the FCC and a bunch of the organizations that give out awards to news channels.
Yeah.
It was basically, an organization or a certification for, telling the truth in news and information. Basically it would be a voluntary program for like TV, print, internet, any of the media out there that would pledge to the media outlets that, they would be truthful in their way they present the news. And in response to that, they would basically get an emblem that they could put on at the beginning of their show and show that they comply.
Yeah.
It'd be the same like the J.D. Edwards and like ISO certification for manufacturers.
You mean J.D. Power or the Good Housekeeping seal of approval.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, and the person who organized this could, put that out there. And obviously it's all voluntary, to sign up for it. So there's no First Amendment violation. I did get a letter back from the one of the news organizations for the RTDNA, which is the Radio Television Digital News Association, and they thought it would be a violation. But anyways, the FCC never responded to it.
If it's an association, it's a lobby shop. That's why.
Okay, yeah. And so anyways, but the thing is, you can certify that. It's, be totally...
I think it's a wonderful idea. It's a great beginning. It's a great start. It does not violate any First Amendment right at all. You can either have the seal of approval that shows that you have standards and practices, that you have an ombudsman, meaning a fact checker, and that everything that is being told to the people who are imbibing this, or, that these people are actually using, accepted journalistic principles, and that they're fact checked and blah, blah, blah. I would like to see, there's a couple things that would solve an inordinate amount of problems. First of all, that's a very good start. I like that whole approach. It's sort of like a Consumer Reports report for media outlets. So Fox would not get it. Sinclair would not get it because everybody must read off of the same script. That is such propaganda right out in the open. I mean, it's just, you could have that. You could have that, and it would be like winning a Pulitzer Prize, or it would be like getting an award of some sort.
Right, but it'd be real time. And then, like, if you had an op-ed or something that's not journalism, you basically have the symbol with the red X through it saying that this is some opinion. This is not part of it, so people can distinguish between opinion and fact.
Yeah, commentary. Right. This is commentary. This is the editorial section. Right. Exactly.
And you could actually, bind it legally, because you get a patent, a copyright on the symbol, and then anyone who just slaps it on their webpage because they want to look like they're official, you basically, would have to have some feedback and find them, and then, do the legal right to cease and desist, and then you can go after them. So, there's some policing issues that would have to be overcome, but it's not impossible.
No, it's very doable, actually. I think it's a whole industry for anybody who would like to take that one on.
And that's why I'm putting it out there. I'm like, someone could probably make a lot of money doing that.
Oh, it's just a great thing. It's a super, super good idea. But the other thing that I think also needs to be done is to say, and write this into a piece of legislation. And, how we pass it, I have no idea yet. But to say that if you are a member of the government, you're a Congress member, you're a senator, you're a president, you're a presidential press secretary, that if you are using your official platform, your official podium to address the American people, we're not talking casual conversation. We're talking about standing at a podium or standing in the House well or on the Senate floor and saying something, that you are under oath.
Right, even at private events,
as long as you're appearing as Congressman so-and-so and sold tickets.
Absolutely. Yep,
sold tickets because you are using your official capacity, your official office, then yes, you're under oath.
Right. It's a formal advertised event. Yes, absolutely.
I think that those two things would go a long way towards guaranteeing the American people that what they see is what they get, and who's lying and who's not, and who's a propaganda artist and who's doing commentary versus who's doing reporting.
Right. And then you can point out to your grandparents, hey, that doesn't have the seal.
No, it's not Walter Cronkite. This is not news. This is something else, but it's not news.
Right. It's funny because we have the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism out here.
Yeah.
It's a great program.
I'll bet. Now, here's the dirty little secret. A lot of journalism schools that used to teach these standards and practices, that used to teach the actual profession of fact management and gathering facts and fact checking and compiling facts and dealing with complicated stories and presenting them in a way that's accessible. They stopped doing that, and now they teach public relations.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
Okay, this is an example of Republicans going all crazy when they believe that a media outlet has got it wrong about them. This is what they think should happen to a media outlet when they, in their little pea brains, think that the outlet got it wrong.
Yesterday, BuzzFeed published a story that was scandalous. It was horrible.
Horrible.
So they should be they should be sued. They should be under investigation. They said the President of the United States counseled someone to lie. And the special counsel had to go through the extraordinary act.
I'm trying to get to the bottom. Let's get to the bottom. I want to find out the truth there.
That's because you have a hysteria. That's because you got a hysteria going on in the media that interprets everything against Donald Trump.
There's no hysteria here, sir.
And
I want to get to the bottom.
Should be careful.
Yes.
What they did yesterday is truly
let's
fake news and disgusting.
Let's be careful. Let's get to the facts of it. Did President Trump?
Let's go. Let's do it.
Did President Trump or anyone on the Trump team talk to Michael Cohen about his congressional testimony before he gave congressional testimony or after he gave congressional testimony?
I can tell you, first of all, I wasn't the lawyer at the time.
Right.
Michael Cohen's lawyers reviewed his testimony with him.
Yeah, but did
President
Trump
No,
anyone...
let me answer the question.
Okay.
As far as I know, President Trump did not have discussions with him, certainly had no discussions with him in which he told him or counseled him to lie. If he had any discussions with him, they'd be about the version of the events that Michael Cohen gave then, which they all believe was true. I believed it was true. I still believe it may be true because unlike these people who want to just believe him, I believe Michael Cohen is a serial liar. If you can figure out when Michael Cohen's telling the truth, you're better than I am, Jake. And that's what happened to BuzzFeed. They bought a totally phony story. They weren't going to buy it unless they got some phony stuff about federal agents, and then they went with it because they're the same ones who published the Steele dossier when no one else would do it. They obviously have a hatred for the president.
But you just acknowledged that it's possible that President Trump talked to Michael Cohen about his testimony.
Which would be perfectly normal. Which the president believed was true.
So it's possible that that happened, that President Trump talked to Michael Cohen about his
I don't know if
testimony.
it happened or didn't happen. And it might be attorney-client privileged if it happened, where I can't acknowledge it. But I have no knowledge that he spoke to him.
Oh, but if I did know, I couldn't tell you anyway. And so BuzzFeed needs to be investigated. They need to be sued. Well, you know, that story is back in the news again because that story is the story that Michael Cohen testified to under oath after he lied to protect Donald Trump, pled guilty to lying to protect Donald Trump. And now they turn around and they say Michael Cohen is a liar. That is a racket. That is an absolute racket. Michael Cohen testified under oath with the penalty being more than 3 years in prison, which is what his plea deal calls for after all these crimes that would have equaled 70 years in prison for Michael Cohen. If Michael Cohen would have lied to Congress when he testified in public last week and is going back tomorrow to testify behind closed doors, if he would be lying now, that plea deal would be ripped up. So he is facing literally dying in prison if he's lying now. Now, BuzzFeed reported that story. That story that Michael Cohen wasn't, I mean, they used the wrong word. Okay, they said that Michael Cohen was directed by Donald Trump to lie. That, we now know, is nothing Donald Trump does. He speaks in code. He says there is no Russia thing. There was no Trump Tower Moscow deal. There is no collusion. There is, and he says it over and over and over again. And Michael Cohen understood that that meant, with Donald Trump's attorney, Jay Sekulow, in the room, to mean that Donald Trump wanted Michael Cohen to lie to Congress, which he did. And Michael Cohen also testified that Trump's lawyers edited his testimony before he submitted it to Congress. That's what BuzzFeed reported.
Reporters look at the special counsel's statement and they say he issued a flat denial. Yeah, it's written in a legal way, but they're challenging the premise of your story. What does that feel like as a reporter?
Never great, but actually I'm solid. My sources are solid. This reporting is accurate.
So the people are saying heads should roll at BuzzFeed, that you're hurting the news business as a whole. What do you say?
I've been a reporter for 20 years. My first job was on the loading dock of the Panama City News Herald. Right? They wouldn't give me a job inside because I was too young and green. I've been doing this again and again and again and again. The same fundamentals that I learned covering City Hall, covering the police, covering courthouses, that stands today, right? That is, I use those same skills, the same rigor to cover the White House. And this is going to be borne out, Brian. This story is accurate.
What if the sources are just wrong?
They're not.
And they weren't. And they weren't. And here's how we know.
This meeting occurred just before your testimony before the Select Committee on Intelligence here in the House. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Was that a topic of conversation with the president himself?
If this is the specific instance that I was there with Mr. Sekulow, yes.
So you had a conversation with the President of the United States about your impending testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What was the nature of that conversation?
He wanted me to cooperate. He also wanted just to ensure, by making the statement, and I said it in my testimony, there is no Russia, there is no collusion, there is no there is no deal. He goes, it's all a witch hunt, and he goes, this stuff has to end.
Did you take those comments to be suggestive of what might flavor your testimony?
Sir, he's been saying that to me for many, many months. And at the end of the day, I knew exactly what he wanted me to say.
And why was Mr. Sekulow in the meeting?
Because he was going to be representing Mr. Trump going forward as one of his personal attorneys in this matter.
So it was sort of a handoff meeting.
Correct.
In any way, final question, did the president in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee?
Again, it's a difficult answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. What he does is, again, Michael, there's no rush. There's no collusion. There's no involvement. There's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point, that's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting, yes, that's the message.
So I guess the BuzzFeed story was true, except for the word directed. See, because Trump doesn't do that, he talks in code. James Comey testified the same way. He said, not in his words did he direct you to let this Flynn go. Not in those words. Well, what did you take it to mean? Because people don't go to jail because somebody hoped for an outcome. I took it as a directive. I took it to mean he wanted me to let Michael Flynn go without prosecution, even though he was our national freaking security advisor and he was doing deals with Saudi Arabia and Russia. Private deals to enrich himself at the expense of our national security as national security advisor. So that's the problem with the BuzzFeed story. The word direct. He didn't direct anybody. He just tells you basically what you should say by saying it himself.
You suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly.
Indirectly.
For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. Isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
And it's your impression that others who work for him understand the code as well?
Most people, yes.
Now, other people who have worked for the Trump organization, Barbara Rez comes to mind, they've been interviewed about Donald Trump's management style. And she said the Cohen testimony rang true to her. So this is how you corroborate these kinds of things. What Michael Cohen has is circumstantial evidence, which is powerful. What Michael Cohen has is a history with the president. What Michael Cohen has are checks, receipts, documents. What Michael Cohen has is a lawyer who's willing to go on TV and show you those documents.
The President of the United States wrote a check as president to Michael Cohen that was part of a scheme to violate campaign finance violations and to violate the rights of the this was a scheme to, in part, to defeat the election. I mean, it was intended, as you well know, it was right after the Billy Bush tape, and the last thing that Mr. Trump wanted, it appears, was to have two other episodes of him being involved with a porn star or a Playboy model, and they wanted to avoid that at all costs. So they paid $130,000 to Stormy Daniels through her lawyer, And the first check, by the way, which was referenced in Mr. Cohen's testimony, was a $70,000 check, which I have with me today. A copy of it I have with me today. A $70,000 check written on the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust, which is also an interesting sidelight.
Yes.
That the check was written on a revocable trust that was theoretically begun so that the president would have some separation between his life as a politician and his life as a civil servant.
Was that provided into evidence at the hearing?
No, we didn't have it at the time.
So
we
walk
have it
us
today.
through, hold it up and walk us through what this means.
Sure. It means that when Michael Cohen went to see the president for the first time in the White House in February of 2017, and the president, as you may recall, his testimony that they looked at all the lovely art, and the president was proud of the whole scene, and it was very awesome, as Mr. Cohen said. The president said to Michael at that time, "You will be getting the 2 checks soon." The 2 checks meaning the 2 $35,000 checks, because as you may recall, Alan, the president's Weisselberg said that instead of paying the entire $420,000 up in one lump sum, he wanted to pay it over the course of a year, $35,000 even each year, each month rather. And so this check, the $70,000 check, which is signed, according to my client, it's signed by Alan Weisselberg and Donald Trump Jr., that this check was the first check, and it's the check that the president himself said to my client when he visited him in the White House, said that that check would be forthcoming soon. And sure enough, it was on Valentine's Day.
Happy
2017.
Valentine's Day, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. This is how the president celebrates Valentine's Day, by paying off his lawyer who paid off his girlfriends. So Michael Cohen's got the receipts. Now, here's what I really want to see. There is a story, and it's, a real journalistic endeavor. And by the way, there are standards and practices in journalism. For instance, you have to have more than one source. 2 would be the minimum to print a story like this. And 3, you also have to call the target of your story. And you have to tell them that you're going to press with a story about you and ask you for a comment so that you can either corroborate the story or defend yourself against the story. Those things happened with BuzzFeed. Those things happen with Jane Mayer. Those things, she has dozens and dozens of people she spoke to. Okay, that's real journalism. Here's a story. Ike Cavalazzi, who was at the Trump Tower meeting with Jr. and Manafort and Kushner, apparently after the election also wrote a check to Michael Cohen for $500,000. I want to see that check, and I want to know what it's for, and I'll bet you tomorrow that's exactly what the Intelligence Committee wants to know. Oh, yeah, I'm good at this. Don't F with me. Morons. Yes, I'm pissed. You know why I'm pissed? Because the fringy parts of our side for a progressive agenda are screwing us. They're messing with us. I don't like it. You need to stop or just get the hell off the air and go do whatever it is you're really good at. Because it ain't this. This is fact. This is not fantasy. This is not conspiracy unless there really is one. And this is RICO. This is a mob prosecution. This is a fraud prosecution. And the fraud has been committed in a conspiracy. And the fraud was to defraud the United States, the American people. And it's ongoing. It's active. And if you won't or can't understand it, you're part of the problem. RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.